Joining us now is former Republican Senator Lincoln Chafee of Rhode Island. As you just heard from the newest Democrat in the Senate, Arlen Specter, Mr. Chafee is no longer in the Senate. He's now a visiting fellow at Brown University. Senator Chafee, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Rachel.
So Senator Specter invoked your name repeatedly and passionately today. So I have to ask if you agree with his assessment about what's happened to the Republican Party.
Yes, absolutely, and especially his point about the Club for Growth, which is the tremendously successful fundraising juggernaut that pours the money into these primary races against moderate Republicans in particular. And I saw it happen to me in 2006, largely responsible for then my loss in the general election. And I like to say, this is America. Anybody can run for office. It's the money that pours in that really makes these primaries destructive ultimately to the party. And the math speaks for itself, down to 40 seats as it looks now.
Well, Senator Specter didn't take on the Club for Growth today on the basis of their positions on political issues. He took them on the issue of the math, as you say, on the political strategy here. I think there's been a little bit of debate about whether or not conservatives, like the Club for Growth, like the ones who came after you, whether they don't care about winning general elections or whether they do care, but they think the way Republicans could win is for them to be really uniformly, narrowly right-wing. Which do you think it is?
It's the former. There's no doubt that we can, if we're weakened by a primary, a destructive and expensive primary, that then we can go into a general and win. Primaries run up your negatives and they cost you money. And yet, those primary opponents, if they beat us, as Senator Specter cited in particular examples, Gilchrist and Schwartz, then they go on to lose the general. It makes no logical sense.
The reason that I know that liberals think about running Democratic primary challengers against members of their party who they think have strayed from liberal orthodoxy, I think is the same, I assume is the same as where the Club for Growth is coming from, which is that ultimately you'll make the party stronger, more electable by pushing people to be accountable for their votes to the ideological basic idea of what the party's about. Do you think that's what's happening on both the left and the right, or do you think it's a different calculation for liberals and conservatives?
I don't see it happening on the left. Don't forget, Joe Lieberman was challenged from the left in a primary, but that's Connecticut. That's a fairly liberal state, fairly blue state through the years. So I don't see it happening from the left the same way it's happening to us Republicans trying to hold on in blue states, such as I was in Rhode Island, such as Senator Specter was in a very, very increasingly blue state of Pennsylvania. To be challenged by that expensive primary, yes, the individual can run, but to have the money pour in from the right ultimately results in losing the seat. And that, as I said, I don't see that happening on the left, but it certainly is happening within the Republican Party and is responsible now for the numbers that are undeniable, 40 seats in the Senate.
Seeing Senator Specter today calling for an uprising, calling for a rebellion essentially within the Republican Party while he's on his way out the door is a striking concurrence of events in the sense that he's saying that there needs to be radical change, but rather than stay inside the party and try to make it, because he thinks that he won't be allowed to stay in the party much longer, he won't be able to hold on to his seat, he's got to get out of the party. Do you think that the Republican Party will change, that it will become more tolerant of the moderates in its midst, or do you feel like the wilderness is still dark and deep?
Well, I left the Republican Party ultimately after considering for a long time that exact question. Is it going to change? And I ultimately decided, no, the party's not going to change. And so I disaffiliated, became an independent. And I would think I was vindicated when I saw the right wing force John McCain into choosing Sarah Palin as his running mate. There was no doubt that he would have had a floor fight at the Republican convention if he had chosen, say, Tom Ridge, pro-choice former governor of Pennsylvania. The far right said, we won't let that happen, and saddled him with an inexperienced running mate. So the party's not changing.
Do you see any path out of the wilderness for them? If you think they're not going to change and you think this is essentially the cause of their current political low status, the low number of seats they've got in Washington, certainly, how does it ultimately turn around? Or does the Republican Party go away?
Well, Senator Specter was calling them for a rebellion, but ultimately I think that it's going to become not a viable national party. That's what I foresee for the Republican Party. And that opens doors for another party to form. Who knows whether that might happen. I'm running as an independent here in Rhode Island, but the opportunity might come down the road to actually be part of a different party. That's possible.
When you run for governor in Rhode Island, did you ever consider running as a Democrat?
Of course, I considered all the options, but ultimately Rhode Island has a strong streak of independents, and it's the largest voting bloc, actually, are unaffiliated voters in Rhode Island, so I decided to run as an independent.
Former Republican Senator Lincoln Chafee of Rhode Island, thank you for your time and your insight tonight. It's nice to see you.
Good to see you, Rachel.